And welcome to the Arts and Sciences Symposium. So we are ready to get started with some English talks and Ms. Jen. Students.
Good morning. I think most of you here are either currently enrolled in Bible is Lit or have been enrolled in Bible is Lit or have taught Bible is Lit with me, Gina. But for those of you who haven't, this is an upper level English course, and the majority of our students enrolled in this class are either English majors or minors, and so they are very, very smart students, very articulate, great thinkers, and exceptional writers. So it's a great lot of fun for me to be able to teach this class, and the way that they are assessed each semester is they write blogs, and so they kind of get to have some say-so regarding the direction of their research. And so the blog presentations that you will hear today were chosen by these particular students, and they have researched these topics in great detail, and they've written about them, and they're hopefully going to be as interesting to you as they are to me. So our first presenter is Dustin Gaskins, and he's actually not enrolled in the class this semester. He was enrolled in Old Testament and New Testament last year. So Dustin, I'll let you get started.
I'm Dustin, and I'm a math major here at JSU, and this morning my talk is going to be I desire mercy and not sacrifice, which is a quote from Jesus in the two verses you can see beneath the title here. I'm going to jump into this because I'm afraid I'm going to run over. In Matthew chapter 9, 10 through 13, it says, "And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, 'Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?' But when he heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but the sinners." So he's eating with the sinners, he's eating with the tax collectors, and they say, "Why are you doing this?" And he sends them on a mission. Go learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Then in Matthew chapter 12, we see a similar occurrence happening. "And at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck the heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, 'Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath.' He said to them, 'Have you not read what David did when he was hungry and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless.' So he tells them, you didn't learn what this means. I sent you on a mission to see what this means, and because you didn't, you have condemned the guiltless." And this is really all we have in the New Testament about this phrase, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And since it was never explained or anything, I thought I would take it upon myself to really try to figure out what it means. And whenever I started searching, I found out that this is a direct quote from Hosea chapter 6, verse 6, where it says, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." And so you may be thinking, Dustin, that doesn't say I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Well, here you go. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. As a matter of fact, when I was looking through it, I decided to look at more versions. And it said, "For kindness I desire and not sacrifice." I want you to show love, not offer sacrifices. I delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice. All these different versions say something slightly different. And then, even as I decided to look at even more, I saw all these different words being used. Mercy, love, steadfast love, loyalty, faithfulness, goodness, loving kindness. All these different words were used in replacements. All these different things were said. And so I was becoming really intrigued. Well, maybe this word is really pivotal to understanding what's going on here. Maybe I need to search out what this means. And so I decided to look at the Hebrew that is used here. And the word is kesed. And the word, it has several different English words that can be translated from it. I probably didn't pronounce that right. But there are several different English words that are translated. And they are mercy, kindness, goodness, pity, favor, and sometimes even reproach or wicked. And so what I kind of began to discover was that this word means a lot in the English language, that it's really a powerful word with a powerful message. And I really thought that using steadfast love was a good idea on the English Standard Version's part, because when we use the word love, we really mean something that's very encompassing, that encompasses a lot of different ideas, and especially throwing in steadfast love in there, where it's constant, it's always going, it's enduring, it's a passion that is never dying out. The zeal is always there. And so, to better understand what this meant some more, I decided to look at it from a literary standpoint and look at it as it is poetry. And the Old Testament is Hebrew, and Hebrew poetry is used, and what is used is often a lot of parallelism. And so what we can see is that not sacrifice is being, or sacrifice is being paralleled with burnt offerings, and steadfast love is being paralleled with the knowledge of God. And so these two are supposed to go together in some way. And so when trying to figure that out, I was trying to tie things together, think about the story with Jesus, think and the Pharisees and what was going on. And I was thinking, okay, so there's got to be some sort of enduring passion, some enduring zeal, and then the knowledge of God, so an understanding of Him, maybe an understanding of His will. And to really cut to the chase, what I decided upon was what it means is that God doesn't want just action. He didn't want them to just do the things that He told them to do. He wanted them to do it seeking to fulfill the purpose behind what He asked. He wanted them to do it in such a way that they were seeking not just to do it, but fulfill it fully, but to do it with everything they had, to do it with love and passion and zeal, and not just really robotic actions that are just trying to fulfill the law. And so this was what Jesus was referring to when he's talking to the Pharisees. And so when we take this back to the story, let's get to know the characters just a second beforehand so we can better understand it. The Pharisees knew the Old Testament extremely well, and they should have known the book of Hosea, and they really sought to do everything correctly. And they probably began with good intentions, but they treated sacrifices, prayer, God's will, all these things like a checklist. Well, I did this today. Well, I did this today. Well, I did this today. Whatever was told, they just went through and tried to go bam, 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 just knock it out, right? And this really became a robotic thing, a ritualistic thing, where they were not seeking to fulfill the purpose. They weren't doing it with love. They were just doing it to look good. They were just doing it to go through the checklist to make sure they did everything right. And that caused them to not really do anything right. And we can see this as we look at the story here. When Jesus is sitting with the sinners and the tax collectors, and the Pharisees come up and they're like, "What are you doing? Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When we see this, we can recognize that they had no understanding of purpose, that when God had told them, "You don't go and mingle with the sinners," He didn't say, "You can't talk to them at all." And as a matter of fact, what Jesus is pointing out to him is that they needed to talk to him, that they need to have love and passion, that they need to heal them, they need to go to them and try to help them and not just stay away from them. Since they didn't understand this purpose, since they didn't understand that, they were trying to do it robotically. Well, I'm not going to go talk to them today. I'm not going to do that. Just a checklist, going through it. They didn't have the chesed. They didn't have the love, the passion, the zeal. They didn't have an understanding of the purpose. And so when Jesus recognized this, He tells them, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice." Go learn how important it is to fulfill the purpose. Go learn how important it is to do everything fulfilling the purpose of love that is already there, trying to do everything with zeal and passion. And then in the next scene, in Matthew 12, 1 through 7, I'm not going to read it all again. This is where he's going through where His disciples are getting corn on the Sabbath, and they're being accused of doing this. And He tells them to go and learn. You didn't learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. To better understand this some more, I'm going to look at the same exact occurrence with Jesus having a slightly different reply in Mark chapter 2, where the same thing is happening. Not going to read all this. They go through and they pick the corn, and then they're told, "Why are you doing this? You're not supposed to do this." And He responds with, "The Sabbath was made for man, not the man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." So you may be wondering how this really correlates. If you look at the two together, He tells them to go. They didn't learn what it means to desire mercy and not sacrifice. And He tells them the Sabbath was made for man, not for the Sabbath, not the man for Sabbath. What he's pointing out to them in Mark chapter 2 is this was the purpose of what was asked for with the Sabbath. The purpose of the Sabbath was for you. The purpose of the Sabbath was so that you would have a day of rest. Not so that you could give back to God, but so that you could have your own day. But you're trying to enforce things on other people in that robotic sense so that you're not fulfilling the purpose anymore. So obviously you didn't learn what it means to desire mercy and not sacrifice. You did not understand the purpose. And because they didn't understand the purpose, they were treating it like a checklist. They had their robotic compliance. And because they were doing this, it caused them to rather make people go hungry than get food on the Sabbath. No zeal, no passion, no love, just robotic compliance. And so that's what Jesus is pointing out to them. You did not go and understand what it means to desire love, steadfast love, rather than sacrifice. You're just trying to get on by. And so the Pharisees had no sense of chesed, if I pronounce that right, because their obedience had become completely self-serving. They were no longer obeying out of love. They were no longer sacrificing to give back to God. Instead, the Pharisees were obeying and sacrificing merely out of self-preservation and a good image. Jesus was making a point to the Pharisees that their obedience was lacking the correct motive. This is what he's pointing out to them. And this is what I desire mercy and not sacrifice means. Go and figure out how you're supposed to have a proper motive. Go and figure out how there should be zeal and passion, and you need to be fulfilling the purpose, not just trying to get yourself on God's good side and not just trying to look good for others. And so we can see some importance in this. The first thing is we can have a better understanding of the Pharisees' practices, how the Pharisees, they were doing everything externally. It was just all external rights and duties and everything. There was no heart into it. The second thing we can learn is we can better understand how the Pharisees were really good antagonists to Jesus. How Jesus was this person who wanted to fulfill love, this person who wanted to show mercy and kindness and goodness and everything and not just do everything right, while the Pharisees were all about doing everything right and who cares about the passion. So we can really see why they clash so much, looking at how they both had two completely different motives. Jesus having a motive of passion and the Pharisees not. And then we have a really practical application. And if you go to sit in the Bible literature class, you'll hear this phrase a lot. Does it have to be true to reveal truth? You'll hear that a lot. And this is one of those times where whether you believe the Bible or not, there's truth that is in this, and that is, if you're going to do something, put your heart into it. Thank you. I figured I'd run over. All right, cool. Anything? Questions, comments? Critique? Oh, okay. When I first chose it for my blog, I was just really intrigued. I had no clue what it meant. And so when I decided to go and look it up and find it, it ended up becoming something that I had a lot of passion and zeal for, the whole concept that was behind it. And if you actually go read the blog, it's like 2,000 words or something, because I ended up just going on and on about it. So I chose it for the research symposium for that reason, that I thought it was a really interesting topic that I liked a lot. Thanks.
That's one thing that, for those of you who may not have experience with Bible is Lit, it may be a bit confusing. It's not Sunday school, it's not church. We are looking at this text pretty much as a piece of literature, like we would analyze other great works of literature. And so some of the, I think, more exciting components come when students have read this solely as kind of this sacred text or a spiritual guide, and they find things in there that aren't quite as whitewashed as they have seemed to be in the past. And so I think it's pretty intriguing when they get excited about this, like our next presenter, Joshua Duckworth has. He's going to be pointing out some elements that could be a little shocking and surprising. The title of his post or his blog is The Sexual Relationship of Yahweh and Israel. So, Joshua, come ahead.
Okay, thank y'all for coming. As she said, my name's Joshua Duckworth, and my presentation is The Sexual Relationship of Yahweh and Israel. Now, in the Old Testament, we are introduced to Yahweh and Israel, and we see a relationship form between them. Now, if Yahweh had a Facebook page, it would definitely be It's Complicated. Beginning in Genesis, we see Yahweh establish the Abrahamic covenant with the patriarch Abraham. This covenant sets forth precedents for their relationship. We see this covenant as the marriage between Israel and Yahweh, and the law that Yahweh gives to Israel as the rules for their marriage. As we move on, we learn that the Old Testament is a crude testament. It is rated M for mature. There are a lot of sexual instances in the Bible, specifically the Old Testament, that we never really hear about. Now, why is that? It's sort of a necessary evil because who would want to stand before a congregation with presumably women and children and talk about some of these things? Who would want to stand before these people and talk about Lot's daughters having sex with him? Who would want to stand before these people and announce Ezekiel 23:20? And lusted after her lovers there, whose members were like those of donkeys, and whose issue was like that of horses. I think everybody just kind of stiffened up. That's in there, I promise. But Israel was not a really good spouse. And Yahweh was a jealous husband. We see in Exodus 34:13, Yahweh commanded his people, "You shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their Asherim." Now, Asherim were these giant wooden poles, phallic symbols, if you would, that gave worship to the fertility goddess Asherah. Asherah was a fertility goddess who was the consort of the pagan deity Baal. We see throughout the Old Testament, but specifically in 2 Kings 14 through 19, where Israel would turn away from Yahweh and run to Baal. Like, hello, we're married, where are you going? Now, as part of the Abrahamic covenant, they established the ritual of circumcision, where the ancient Hebrew people would circumcise the foreskins of their penis. Health issues aside, why would Yahweh want this? It would be because as Israel turned away from Yahweh into Baal, they would fall in pagan worship of worldly, carnal, physical, sexual things. Now, it's widely known that circumcision, or it's widely known today that circumcision reduces pleasure for men. Yahweh would have known this even if the Israelites didn't. Now, would Yahweh have had them circumcise their foreskins so that it would be less likely for them to turn away from him and toward to the orgiastic rituals of the pagans? I think so. Because that sets a precedent for the way the culture of the Hebrews developed. We can see this specifically in their poetry. When they reference sex, even when it is an acknowledgement of Yahweh and not a pagan deity, they sort of go around that word. We see in Psalm 92:10, "But you have exalted my horn like that of the wild ox. You have poured over me fresh oil." That horn's not a horn. I can tell you that much. We see that in Psalm 132 and 75, this is repeated to the same effect. They do not want to make sex into a form of idolatry. They want to make it into worship of Yahweh. By going around it, they make it to where the focus is on Yahweh, not the physical desires. The same phrase even occurs in Job 16:15. I have sewed sackcloth upon my skin and defiled my horn in the dust. Is exactly what I was just saying. Job is the oldest book in the Bible, and this demonstrates the pervasive nature of sex in Hebrew culture. Another euphemism common in Hebrew poetry is grind. The Bible does not only exalt the male appendage by referencing it in other ways, but also female stuff. Job 31:10 says, "Then let my wife grind for another." Yeah. Isaiah 47:2 says, "Take the millstones and grind flour, put off your veil, strip off your robe, uncover your legs, pass through the rivers." They're not grinding flour. They don't need their legs for that. Sexual misconduct is what Isaiah is referencing to, in contrary to the sexual relationship with Yahweh. We can see these as examples of misconduct in Yahweh's law. There are other euphemisms found in Hebrew poetry. The most commonly known euphemism is knowing someone in the biblical sense. Genesis 4:1 says, "Now Adam knew Eve." I mean, yeah, he knew her. They were made together. She came from his rib, but he knew her. In Ruth 3:9, we see where Ruth, in a way, seduces Boaz. "Spread your wings over your servant." Your wings. I don't think he had wings. Just saying. All right. And then in Lamentations 1:9, we see her uncleanliness was in her skirts. She took no thought of her future. Therefore her fall is terrible. She has no comforter. This is another euphemism which shows the sexual misconduct that would lead to the fall of the Israelites from Yahweh. Of course, the ultimate form of Hebrew poetry is the Song of Solomon. It is here where we would see Israel grow cocky and pull away from Yahweh. This is a concept known as Deuteronomistic history. When Israel is faithful to Yahweh, everything's good. When they pull away from Yahweh, it's not so good. Now, some would say that this is just a poem between two worldly lovers. Well, it was written by Solomon, and we learn in 1 Kings 11:13 that Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. This is not a love story between Solomon and any of these single women. I mean, which one would it be? He'd probably lose which one it was. So Song of Solomon serves as an example of Deuteronomistic history. Yahweh is the forgiving lover who constantly takes back the cheating Israel. It's like the day when we see a boyfriend whose girlfriend just cheated on him, but you know what? They come back, they get together. We're telling them not to do it, but it happens. That's Yahweh. Even in the Song of Solomon, there are euphemisms that gives a way around making sexual symbols idolatry. In Solomon 7:13, he references mandrakes, which were symbolic of male genitals. Solomon 2:13, we see a fig tree, which is, of course, a phallic symbol. What tree isn't? All right. So what Song of Solomon does show us is that Yahweh approves of sex, that him and Israel are very sexual with each other. But he wants it done in passion, with just them as part of their covenant, as part of their marriage, not the free sex that the pagans practically worship. That he does not want them falling to worldly worship of sex. In order to prevent that, that's where it brings us back to the ritual of circumcision. He circumcised his people in order to try to stop them from turning away from him. Like, baby, come back. Okay, so the voice of Yahweh in Israel were his prophets. Namely, I will be discussing 3: Hosea, Amos, and Jeremiah. What do we need to know about Hosea? He marries a prostitute. He loves her even after she cheats on him, and her name was Gomer. That sounds familiar. Where did I hear that from? Oh yeah, that's Yahweh in Israel right there. Parallelism. Hosea's life on earth mimicked Yahweh and Israel's relationship. Amos, the whole chapter 3 of the book of Amos, is condemnation of Israel by its actions. Through through Amos, Yahweh announces, "You only have I known." Well, I mean, yeah, he knows them. He's known them for a few years. Oh, wait. That's a euphemism right there. He has only, in the biblical sense, known Israel. In Jeremiah 2, 2 through 4, it reads, "I remember the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness in a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord, the firstfruits of his harvest. All who ate of it incurred guilt. Disaster came upon them." Now, we have learned in class that holy means to be different. So, if Israel is holy to the Lord, does that mean that they are exclusive? Well, yeah, Yahweh was very jealous. We've seen that with Baal. As to the devotion of their youth, when they were younger, when they were more faithful, we can see that as the honeymoon phase of their relationship. But of course, it ends in disaster, divorce. Okay. So, in many ways, we can see the Old Testament as the marriage, and then thus the conception, the 400 years of silence that divide the Old Testament and the New Testament as the gestation period, and the New Testament as the birth and life of the Son of God, the Son of Man, Israel, Jesus Christ. Well, they had a child together. Whoops. That's a spoiler if you haven't read the New Testament, by the by. I'm sorry. So, why do we whitewash sex out of the Bible? Why do we not discuss this when in Bible study or in church? As I said earlier, it's sort of a necessary evil not to announce these things to a congregation of women and children. But as we grow older, as we become adults, this whitewash mentality needs to be removed because it damages the understanding of the text as a whole. Is that not what we are taught to do? To understand the text as a whole. Every bit, every word means something. Every euphemism, every parallel, everything means something. And what it means is that Yahweh and Israel were sexual. They were lovers, and they had a child. As part of it, we can still see that today. Circumcision still occurs today, but we no longer really need it. The medical issues that would have arisen back then would not arise today due to developments. So why do we still continue to do it? That is because we are followers, if you believe in that, of Yahweh. And what else would Yahweh have wanted but for us to turn from sexual idolatry and worship of Yahweh? Thank you. It's if I'm not mistaken, it's a fruit that has like a little divide in between it, so that when you look at it, it's yeah. Come on, hit me with your best shot. Oh, okay.
So, as you can imagine, my face turns red a lot in this class. There is never a dull moment, that is for sure. Our next speaker is Candace Thompson, and she is going to be discussing actually my two favorite books of the first part in Old Testament, and the topic of her presentation is Straining the Covenant, Parallels in the Books of Genesis and Judges. So, Candace, go ahead.
The books of Genesis and Judges have many parallels. They both feature multiple heroes, and they convey the stories of their lives in vivid detail. But in each book, two incidents in particular stand out because of their similarities. These are the binding of Isaac from Genesis, compared with the sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter in Judges, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah with the murder of the concubine in the book of Judges. Although violence ties these instances together, the question remains as to why Genesis shows instances of divine mercy, while the incidents in Judges do not get such treatment. Firstly, the near sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham and the potential sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter are alike in the fact that both involved the protagonist, also known throughout the text as God. In Genesis, the binding of Isaac comes on the orders of the protagonist. In Genesis chapter 22, Abraham is put to the test. He is told to go to the land of Moriah, and there he will offer Isaac as a burnt offering on one of the mountains. In the book of Judges, Jephthah begins his own test out of his own accord. In return for victory against the Ammonites, Jephthah vows to give as a sacrifice whatever comes out of the doors of his house to greet him. Back in Genesis, Abraham takes with him to perform the sacrifice Isaac and 2 servants. When Abraham spies the location for the sacrifice in the distance, he tells the servants to stay behind while he and Isaac head over to the mountaintop to worship. Suspense builds as he and Isaac walk along the way to the mountain, especially when Isaac is curious about how the two are going to offer a sacrifice when there isn't an animal around. Jephthah's success in battle functions in a similar way as the walk to the mountain does, building tension. However, Isaac's reaction when Abraham prepares the altar and him for sacrifice is not mentioned in the text. It simply describes what Abraham does. When Jephthah's daughter comes out to greet him with dances and with tambourines, no less, Jephthah tears his clothing and tells his daughter that she has brought him very low and became a cause of great trouble to him due to his vow. His daughter reacts by telling him to do what he had vowed, with the stipulation that she be allowed 2 months of mourning in the mountains with her friends. While Isaac's brush with death is immediate, the one of the unnamed daughter has some delay. When Jephthah's daughter returns from this mourning period, the text says that Jephthah did with her according to the vow that he had made. Chapter 11, in which the incident takes place, concludes with the mention of the fact that mourning her became a custom for Israel, and that the daughters of Israel mourned Jephthah's daughter for 4 days out of the year. For Isaac, a reprieve is granted by an angel. The angel calls out to Abraham to tell him not to harm Isaac and that his fear of God has been made known through this rite. After that, Abraham glances up and spies a ram caught in a thicket, and he sacrifices the ram in the place of his son. The angel of God calls out to him again and promises him children as numerous as the stars of heaven and as the sand on the seashore. Through Abraham's children, the angel declares, "Shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." The binding of Isaac ends with death being averted and a message of hope, while the tale of Jephthah's daughter ends with the women of Israel mourning for her. Perhaps the difference in the two situations comes from the fact that God had a direct hand in Abraham's trial, while Jephthah made his vow entirely of his own accord. The two incidents can be seen as foils to one another. A recurring theme throughout the book of Judges is the fact that Israel has no king, and therefore one can do as one pleases. Judges serves as a prime example of Deuteronomistic history in which the people of Israel fall repeatedly, but they're always lifted back up by God. The history is known for repeating itself in a cyclical manner, and this is part of the argument made by scholar David Jansen, who claims that the story of the unnamed daughter of Jephthah highlights the book's most important theological motif, that when Israel worships like foreigners, it will act like foreigners, he makes this claim in his essay, Why the Deuteronomists Told About the Sacrifice of Jephthah's Daughter. In the previous chapter, before we see Jephthah inaugurated as a judge, it mentions that Israel has fallen back to the worship of Baal and to the Ashtaroth. And this mention helps reinforce the idea that the sacrifice could have been literal and taken as a sign of Israel's moral decay. Alternatively, it could highlight Jephthah's character by showing his extremely rash and even foolish behavior. What's especially telling is the fact that he blames his daughter for this incident instead of blaming himself. Abraham is willing to give up Isaac when called upon by God and not in the place of some extravagant promise made on his own behalf. The text itself is somewhat ambiguous concerning the fate of Jephthah's daughter, as it never states that she is murdered outright. As such, alternative views of her sacrifice have spread. Rabbi and scholar Moshe Rice points out in his essay, Jephthah's Daughter, that the rabbis of the Talmudic era assumed that the sacrifice was literal. It wasn't until the Middle Ages, with Abraham, Ibn Ezra, and other medieval Jewish thinkers, that the interpretation emerged that Jephthah's daughter could have been sent into seclusion and made into a type of nun. The binding of Isaac, in fact, serves as a precedent for why such a sacrifice would not have been acceptable. The binding of Isaac marks the beginning of a covenant, and the sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter, whether it's viewed as being metaphorical or literal, is an example of a strain put on the established covenant. Going back earlier in Genesis, but later in Judges, similarities can be found in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah with the murder of the concubine. In chapter 19 of Genesis, angels visit Lot disguised as visitors. After insisting that the travelers stay with him instead of in the town square, the angels share a meal with Lot and his family, and they prepare for bed. But before they can sleep, all the people of the cities, down to the last man, young and old alike, surround Lot's house and demand that his guests be thrown out to the angry and perverse mob. In response, Lot offers up his 2 virgin daughters, because the men are under his roof and thus deserve protection. Likewise, in Judges, when the anonymous Levite and his concubine pass through Gibeah, the elderly man who agrees to take them in for the night wants them to not rest in the town square. While the 3 are having a meal, the men of Gibeah surround the house and demand that the visiting Levite be tossed out to them. The elderly man tells them that because he is a guest, they should not commit such a heinous crime against him. As Lot does, he offers up his virgin daughter as well as the Levite's concubine. Back in Genesis, before Lot's daughters can be tossed out to the mob and before Lot can be trampled by the mob, the angels strike the crowd blind and they pull Lot back inside the house and warn him of the impending destruction of the cities. Lot procrastinates and he doesn't leave before dawn, but even then the angels forcefully send him and his family out of the cities. The concubine of Judges is not so fortunate. She, instead of the elderly man's daughter, is thrown to the mob and abused horribly until daybreak. The Levite finds her the next morning. Her lifeless hands are clutching the threshold of the house. The Levite takes her corpse and returns home, and there he divides her body into 12 pieces and sends a limb to a part of the land of Israel. Everyone who sees the concubine's limbs declare that such a thing has never been seen from the day that the people of Israel have left Egypt until this day. And immediately Israel as a whole decides to consider it, take counsel, and speak. In the chapter immediately following, the people of Israel muster together in unison, and they declare that none of them shall leave for their homes or return to their tents before Gibeah is repaid for all the outrage that they have committed. God returns to the scene in some way again. For instance, Israel asks which tribe shall go strike Gibeah and the tribe of Benjamin first, and God replies that Judah shall be the one to do so. And the people once more fast and offer sacrifices to God. Even though the battles against the Benjaminites later proved disastrous because the tribe is nearly obliterated, the fantastic display of unity shown by Israel in response to the brutal murder of the concubine shows an upswing in the cycle of Deuteronomistic history, and it provides a clear message of hope. In contrast, the fate of Lot's family is not that great. Lot and his daughters are left to live in a cave. His wife has been turned into a pillar of salt for looking back at the ruined cities. Lot's daughters enact a plan to get their father drunk and conceive children by him, as they think that there is no man in the whole world left to lie with either of them. His eldest daughter bears Moab as a result of the union, and the youngest bears Ben-Ammi. Both of the babes grow up to found the nations of the Moabites and the Ammonites. Rather than provide some sort of closure, which seems to occur after the death of the concubine, the birth of the children at the end of Genesis 19 serves as a foreshadowing for the difficulties to come for the future people of Israel. In short, both the binding of Isaac and the sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah and the death of the unnamed concubine are bound together by their similar circumstances. Abraham and Jephthah are both fathers that must kill their sole heirs. However, Abraham is freed from having to carry out such an awful deed through divine intervention and sacrifices a ram in place of his son. While a metaphorical take on Jephthah's vow is certainly possible, the text heavily implies that the sacrifice is literal. Such a story fits then as part of how Judges relates Deuteronomistic history. It is an example of a downward turn. While the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah at first seems to be an upward turn as the family of Lot is spared, it turns out to be a downward turn as the man and his daughters are left homeless and the two patriarchs of Israel's future enemies are brought into the world. The reaction of Israel to the brutal rape and murder of the concubine, on the other hand, is an example of the upswing back to God. God is directly brought back into the story through answering questions and through the devotions and sacrifices that are made once more. While the events of Genesis display the beginnings of a covenant and its first strain, the events of Judges relate an already deeply strained covenant and its slow restoration. Thank you.
Our last speaker for the Bible is Lit presentations is Helen Companion, and the title of her presentation is Covenantal Companionship, the Love Story of David and Jonathan. Can everyone hear me? That'll work? Okay, great. 3 out of 4 Bible students apparently want to talk about love and sex today, so we'll have some fun with this. David is perhaps among the most famous of biblical heroes. His triumph over Goliath is known even to most children, even those from non-Christian households. His exploits from time as king helped to set the foundation for the struggling nation of Israel, and his poetry is credited for being the basis of much of Psalms. For those unfamiliar with the books, 1 and 2 Samuel tells the story of how Israel selects a king in an attempt to halt the dominion of corrupt judges, which Candace just talked about. Saul is first chosen, and at first things seem to go well. Saul makes a series of mistakes, is abandoned by God, and David is chosen as successor. I don't like how it sounds. Saul and David are initially close, but soon Saul begins to fear losing his authority and targets David. In the final confrontation between the two, Saul commits suicide, and David formally becomes king. After this, the text follows David's rise to power and his subsequent fall, as well as the tensions that arise between northern and southern Israel as a result of the new form of government. However, when 1 Samuel describes the relationship between David and Jonathan, who is Saul's son, it is nearly impossible to read it without suspecting homoerotic leanings. Let's look at a few passages.
As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. This is the first meeting between the two characters, which is presented as a story of love at first sight. For even more tension, Saul has demanded that David come to live with him and Jonathan. I'm just going to watch that screen. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. A vow, along with clothes being torn off? Sounds like a honeymoon to me. Soon, however, Saul begins to fear that David will become God's new chosen king, a fear that is, of course, founded. As a result, Saul starts planning to murder David. And Saul spoke to Jonathan his son and said to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, "Saul, my father seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself." Jonathan tells David to hide in a secret place where the two of them can meet up later. And of course, secret meetings to get away from disapproving parents are a stock element of many love stories. While David is hiding, Jonathan pleads with his father to please give David another chance, which Saul does. But soon after, Saul begins the murder plots again, and David must go find another secret place to hide. These next two passages occur as they are parting ways. But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Jonathan made him swear his love? Sounds to me like Jonathan feared David was being unfaithful, especially since Jonathan was quite adamant only a few lines prior that he was there to serve David's every whim. And back at home, things between Jonathan and Saul are becoming quite real. Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. In the coming days, before Saul leaves to attempt to kill David, this time for real, Jonathan refuses to eat. And then he rushes off to meet David in the arranged secret place. David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times, and they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Refusal to eat after being denied access to a lover, secret romantic trysts complete with passionate kissing. To modern readers, the above lines feel pretty explicit, especially since David twice denies Saul when he offers his daughters to David in marriage. And then there's the poem that David composes after finding out about Jonathan's death. "I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women." So that's it, right? There's clearly something going on here. Of course not. It's not that easy. There are many types of love, as Dustin mentioned. Nearly all of them involve some degree of physical affection and emotional intensity. In English, we have the same word for most meaningful relationships. We might love our dog, parent, spouse, child, boss, hobbies. And for all of these, we generally use the same word, love. In many other languages, though, including Hebrew, there are different words for different kinds of love. In the case of David and Jonathan, the specific words and phrases denoted political connotations and friendship, rather than a sexual matter. Additionally, the passages lack the normal biblical language revealing sexual activity, such as came into, uncovered nakedness, or, as Josh mentioned, knowing, that are generally with biblical explanations of sex. Had the relationship been of a sexual nature, then it would have been reasonable to expect the sort of language that had been used previously. This is further reflected by the word covenant to describe the bond between the two men. This is certainly not the first covenant explored in the text. The word covenant, or berit, which I'm probably mispronouncing in Hebrew, is used to refer to three very important covenants that God makes with the patriarchs of Israel, including Noah, Abraham, and later Moses. And it's the same word that is used for the relationship between David and Jonathan. Perhaps the most important of these is the Mosaic covenant, which follows the form of a suzerain treaty. These treaties were legal contracts between a lord and a vassal. They specifically outline the responsibilities, benefits, and penalties for each party. Because the word covenant has been used previously within the work to reflect a legal agreement between two parties, we can reasonably assume the same is the case here. Certainly, Jonathan may have recognized the qualities of a great leader in David, as God had done. And since Jonathan was the son and assumed heir to Saul, the covenant may have simply been a promise of alliance between the two families. The relationship between David and Jonathan, then, can be seen as an ideal for the culture. The Hebrew God placed focus on relationship between members of a community, rather than how his followers were to treat him or how they might better their own needs. This can be seen by looking at the 10 Commandments as outlined in Exodus and Deuteronomy. 6 out of the 10 Commandments focus on how people were to treat each other. Adherents were not to kill, take things that did not belong to them, or intentionally harm each other. And what would be a better demonstration of harmonious living than friendship, where ideally each party puts the needs of the other before their own? And this idea is further underscored by Isaiah 41, 8 through 9, where God quite literally compares his relationship with his people as that of friendship, saying, "But you, Israel, my servant, whom I have chosen, my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its farthest corners, saying to you, you are my servant. I have chosen you and not cast you off." And David, being a man after God's heart, would be expected to have a similar ideal of what friendship entailed. In the quotes referenced at the beginning of this presentation, both men act in servitude to the other at various points in the story, and neither abandons the other when they are in need, just as God promises in the above passage. Rather than a romantic relationship, then, the relationship between David and Jonathan can be viewed as an ideal for the culture to which they both belonged. It can be reasonably assumed from the text that Jonathan and David were very close friends, and certainly it is possible that they were romantically involved. However, it can just as easily be discerned that these two men were an ideal for their culture. David and Jonathan were close friends, effective soldiers, and political allies. As much fun as it is to search for hidden modern interpretations within the Bible, it's just as important to keep the cultural context of the time in mind, as that provides a better understanding of the overall work. Any questions? No? No? All right. I see how it is.
Good morning. I'm glad to introduce Travis Chambers, who was in my foreign policy class in the fall semester. And part of the class developed position papers, and Travis developed one on the impact of early and forced marriage and the rights of a child in Afghanistan. This continues to be an issue in several parts of the world, and so I'm going to let Travis expand on that in his position paper.
Thank you, Dr. Owens. As she said, my name is Travis Chambers, and I had a couple of reasons why I wanted to write on this topic. So the first reason, and the most important reason, is I'm a combat veteran. I've served in Afghanistan in 2013 and 14. I was in country for 9 months, and I had a limited action with children while I was there, but it was enough to kind of get a feel for them. And obviously, once you go to Afghanistan, you begin to realize that all the people there, they aren't bad, and I really enjoyed hanging around the children. So I was obviously motivated by that. Now, as Dr. Owens mentioned, for my second reason, I was in her American Foreign Policy class. I was also a member of her debate team. She sent out an email before the class even started and asked who would be interested in that. So I just signed up for it because I'm just that kind of person. And to prepare us for a competition, it's really not a competition, but it's an event that's held in Atlanta, Georgia. It's the Southern Regional Model United Nations, which was founded in 1990. Its mission is basically to provide exemplary learning experience for undergraduate and graduate students interested in pursuing issues of international concern. So, and I was also a part of the Humanitarian Summit. So I had to choose a different country. We represented Morocco, so I chose Afghanistan, obviously because of the interests that I spoke of. So now let's get to the good part. Now there are many reasons that this is an issue, but here are a few that I will lay out for you. First is poverty. Obviously, there are many poor people in that region in Afghanistan, and children are seen as a burden to some families because they can't afford to feed them. They can't afford to clothe them. So what they'll do is they'll marry them off at 8 or 9 years old, taking their childhood away before they really even get to enjoy it, forcing them into adulthood. The next is the limited education. The biggest thing that broke my heart when I was over there was, the kids were awesome, but when we would go on missions from, 10 in the morning, 2 p.m., the kids weren't in school. They were out. The illiteracy rate is high in Afghanistan. So that's one of the biggest things that has to change, and that's one of the reasons why you see this problem taking the toll that it has. The next is insecurity in the face of conflict. I think everyone in this room knows that it's been bad in Afghanistan for the past, decade. We've been there for a while. So some families they'll marry their kid off at a young age thinking that that's a way to protect them. And I don't know how the results of that turned out, but it's another reason. And the final thing is tradition and religion. Religion is taken extremely serious in Afghanistan. One of the things that I actually read up on was some families will actually marry their children, their daughters young because they don't want them to have sex before marriage because that's seen as a dishonor to your family. And dishonor is taken serious over there. And obviously I'm pretty sure there are some religious people out here in the crowd today, but you won't see the public shame, the way that they'll treat you over there if you did that to your family. Now, here's some statistics for you. More than 50% of women in Afghanistan are married before they are 12 years old, and 60% are married by the age 60% are married by the age of 16. Generally, marry men much older than them. Some of these men may be 60, 70 years old. And a lot of times, they won't see their husband until the day of the wedding. I couldn't imagine being 8 or 9 years old and marrying someone that's 60 years old. So now, obviously, with early childhood marriage, there's going to obviously be some problems that comes with it. Well, it increases the likelihood of early pregnancy, which heightens the risk of death and injury in childbirth. According to a 2010 morality survey by the Ministry of Public Health, 47% of deaths of women of age 20 to 24 were related to pregnancy. It also found that one Afghan woman died every 2 hours because of pregnancy. Child marriage and early pregnancy also contributes to fistula, and that is a preventable childbirth injury in which prolonged labor creates a hole in the birth canal. A 2011 report found that 25% of women with fistula were younger than 17 when they were married, and 17% were younger than 16 years old when they gave birth to their first child. A fistula leaves one leaking urine or feces, and if it's left unattended, could cause serious medical problems and eventually lead to death. Children born as a result of childhood marriages also suffer increased health risk. The 2010 morality survey, which I briefly mentioned, also found a higher death rate among children born to Afghan mothers who were under the age of 20 compared to those born to older mothers, which reflects global findings. Now, what has Afghanistan done about this? What are they trying to do to help this problem out? Well, President Hamid Karzai signed a Violence Against Women law in 2009, which ushered in vital protections against child marriage and also domestic violence. So I'll briefly talk about domestic violence. a survey that I read over found that, early childhood marriages, you'll see more domestic violence in those relationships than one for the people who are married after the age of 24, I believe it was. And this was a law that was imposed, it imposed tough new penalties for abuse of women, including childhood marriage and forced marriages, and crimes under Afghan law. It made it a crime under Afghan law for the first time in history. So with this being said, him actually putting this into action, the problem that you have is these laws weren't being enforced. So obviously, he was a Democratic president. He was elected to office. So the last thing that he has to do, and this is a must do before he gets out of office, he has to let every person know that he is going to lay down the law when it comes to this. Otherwise, you will continue to see this. You will continue to see that generation affected by early childhood marriages. And it's not only females. I know that I've mentioned a lot of females, but it's also males too. But more than not, it's going to be your females that you're going to see that are going to go through these problems. So some other recommendations that they need to have to actually fix this problem is basically they need to make the country more aware of the situation that's going on. So they need to basically launch a countrywide awareness campaign. They need to tell them about fistula. They need to tell them about the domestic violence rates that they have. That way, people begin to realize, well, this is wrong. We need to do something to change. And also, I mentioned that to ensure that the laws are being enforced, and support a passage of a law to set the minimum age at 18 for girls and boys, so their childhood will not be taken away from them. Thank you. Do I have any questions at this time? Yes. It can actually be both, ma'am. But more than not, you'll see a child and a child. So let's just say the boy was 12 years old. He actually may be married to a girl that's 8 years old, and it really doesn't make sense, when you think about financial stability, and it kind of goes back to the poverty issue that I mentioned. These families may think that they're helping their daughters out, or they're really technically helping themselves out because they're taking the burden off of themselves and they're putting it on someone else. So, any other questions? Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Good morning. So the next talk is Android app creation process, and that probably will be attended with attention from all of the people present here, because that's something that we use every day, right? The apps, and we almost cannot go somewhere without actually checking, where I'm going, right? What directions I'm going to take. So he will focus on explaining the process, kind of the algorithm that we use to create the app. See, for computer scientists, everything has to be spelled out as an algorithm. So he explained to me too that that's the direction that he will go this morning. So he is a graduating senior. Are you, right, to Trey, or next year? Okay. And he is just passionate about, several type of apps. And this, a little bit later, you'll actually have another presentation, right? Yes, okay. Come on in and start.
All right. Today we're going to talk about Android app creation, the process that you take, the steps that you take to go through creating that application. And my topic of discussion is just going to be walking you through each individual step as we go through this process of creating an application instead of just consuming. And that's a big part of what computer science is geared towards, is to make you creators and not consumers. And I'm going to walk through some general software development terms, the 5 stages of software development: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. It's only slightly a joke. Yes. It's almost a truth in software development because you can see us going through these stages very frequently, denying that our program doesn't work, getting angry at the program, bargaining with the program to see if it will actually work for once, and going through a stage of depression until it finally works. But seriously, I'm going to walk you through the steps that I take personally and the way that my brain is geared towards working through these processes. I'm talking about conceptualizing, visualize, generalize, finalize, and then revise. So when we conceptualize, we're going to talk about what problem are we solving, and then has it been done, and if it has, how can we make it better? That's a lot of what our algorithms are about. We're going to optimize. And I've been talking, we've been going over discussion in my machine learning with artificial intelligence class that we're talking about optimizing and optimization. So you always want to optimize your application to be as fast or as efficient as possible, give your users the most flexibility with everything. And why am I solving this problem, and where do I begin? So in visualization, we want to talk about the visual design, format with familiarity in mind, talking about putting things where users expect them to be. We want to make sure that our user is comfortable in the area that we put them in. And we want to put ourselves in their shoes, because we're consumers also. As much as we try to make it out that we only make things, we also take part in them. We do. And we want to be able to say, okay, this is how they expect it to be. Generalize. In generalization, I see that usually I try to build to get a finished product. I want to have something to present to somebody, be able to show them my application. Okay, this is something that I can show you and show you that it works. We try to not add too many features initially so you can build off of a base structure. You want to give yourself something to start with and then just build upon it. You work with what you have, and when all else fails, do what other good developers do. Many times, it's a joke in computer science, we become friends with Google and Stack Overflow. We always have to ask our own questions and find other people who have answered our questions. And in Finalize, we try to get a shippable product and make it as error and bug-free as it can be. It's always going to happen, but we try to make it as error-free as we can tell. We send it out into the real world, and then we collect data and plan for future features and bug fixes. Then we want to go in and revise. You work on fixing the bugs from deployment, and then you implement the new features that are requested by your users. And then you establish a plan for all future upgrades and updates. And then this is my simple application that I built while going through this process. And if Dr. Trefus, if you will just play, it has a little screen capture of me kind of going over. Yeah, on the one over there. Just press the play button. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. It's supposed to be I may not be compatible with that version of Office. I'm not entirely sure. But I had a screen capture of me running a virtual device, the application on a virtual device. But I guess, yes. Well, technical difficulties, they happen, right? Well, so I actually, when you have this application open, it will give you an option for entering a name of a work item that you are doing for someone. So say I go mow your lawn. I put on there that I mowed your lawn, and I put in the price following that of what I charged you. And upon that, you can add it, and it'll append it to a total and keep the track of the total for you. And then you go to click the total button, and then upon clicking the total button, it brings you to another screen with a breakdown of your bill, of the bill you're going to give to the person. And I also included a screenshot button where take a screenshot, save a file to your phone, so you could say, okay, here's the bill that you owe me, and send it to that person. And that was the premise, because a lot of people would, do odd jobs or something like that, and that's just about going through the process. That's the problem that I wanted to solve. That's the problem that I chose to solve. A lot of people may go do odd jobs for somebody, or you may go do something for your family, and you can keep track of all the things and just send them a bill breakdown of what they need to pay for what you charge them. Any questions? Yes. Yes, and with the way that people are going so digital, a lot of people keep everything on their phone, almost everything. And so I was thinking, if you have a screenshot of that on your phone, that you would be able to say, you just carry it around with you. And if you need to bring it up, you can say, okay, this is what you owe me for the services that I just did. And it's always there. It's always about keeping things on hand in this digital world that we're in. Well, that's interesting, because the features that you could add to this, there's a lot of different things. You could add notes about descriptions of the work instead of just saying I mowed their lawn. You could have, well, I mowed their lawn, and here's the size of, like, a note, append a note to that, and you could have that displayed in the bill as well. Because if you go to a restaurant and you have a bill, they may have a description, somewhat description of things that you've added on to, or that's another instance. You could have add-ons to, say I mowed your lawn, but then I also trimmed your hedges, and I just append that to the total instead of having to create a whole new work item. Just give you an extra charge. So. Oh, yeah. Yes, a lot of them, they use the Square. Many of them use Square, which is, I have one myself. I haven't put it into use, but you just plug in a card reader under your phone and use the application to just accept cash. And I could probably even add a feature that would be able to work with the Square app. I would just have to find their APIs and be able to sync them up with my application. That would be another feature that I could possibly add on to it, and that would probably be more beneficial. It's all about checking to see what the users, and that's what I was talking about when I say you send it out to deployment, and what the users say back to you will be what you look for new features.
Okay, continuing the game demos here from Game Design 1, the 2D games. I have 3 of my students here who have done a really fun, cool game here. Lydia Wright, Joy Pinkert, and Brian Willis are here to tell you all about Catmando.
Hey, I'm Lydia, and this is Joy, hiding behind me somewhere. This is our game, of course, Catmando. We spent in class, how long was it? Like 3 weeks, something like that?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Basically, everything you see here is hand-drawn, except one thing, which is in the 3rd level. It's basically it was a picture of J.S. Bach, and it was a knockoff of the Xbox. We called it the Z-Box. And as you can see, that one right there. And the items floating around, the one that he just grabbed right now, we call it Starclux. It's basically like chicken coffee for cats. It gives you a speed boost. The leaves you see is basically catnip, and it'll slow down the time. The reason why the time is there is because these cats have overrun this market, and because the only reason why they're there doing that sort of thing is because of the milk, and because they're alley cats. Of course, this is Catmando, so they're raiding the market. The robots, in case you're incredibly confused why they even have robots in the first place, is because it's too expensive to have human employees. These ones, all you have to do is just recharge them. You don't have to pay them anyway. The water balloons, because cats hate water, and as well as the water spill, because you have to have those signs anyway. The 3 levels that we've already just kind of blazed straight through. The first one was the pet aisle. The second one was the gaming aisle, which was the 2nd longest. Each of these levels have different lengths. And this is the food aisle. And all of these different aisles are basically knockoff brands. As you can see, there's Frosted Snakes, Honeycrumb cereal, Myth peanut butter, because it's unbelievable peanut butter, and just a whole bunch of these silly names that we gave. And Joy, would you like to explain a little bit on the graphics and the boss level as it comes up?
Thank you, Lydia. As you can see, all the graphics are original except for that one very small detail that Lydia pointed out earlier. I worked on some of the bigger graphics. The cats, you can see fully animated. They move up and down. They walk a little bit. The robot, Lydia did. She did all the background art. I did. See the lives up there? You can see your ammo, your GUI. We worked very hard on the graphics for this game. We wanted it to be a very comfortable, friendly interface for the user to see. Here we have the boss level. I worked particularly hard on this one. It's fully animated. The boss has a different animation for each of his movements. When he's moving forward, he kind of leans. When he's going backward, he leans backwards. When he's about to shoot, he stomps his little segue, as he's doing right now. I'm very proud of how this level in particular came out with the graphics. The sprinklers have to go off at a certain time. I wrote a piece of code to actually delegate when the sprinklers would go off. It would have to be one sprinkler, and when this sprinkler is on, turn it off after a certain number of time, and then turn off the next sprinkler, and then the next sprinkler. So it was very, very interesting to actually write that and to get the overhead stuff working too. That was really nice. Yes, the music is 100% original. Lydia would be responsible for all of that. The sound effects as well. Everything you hear, my dear friend Lydia has worked on herself. She did an excellent job with that. Should we talk about the code, I think?
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. The code, again, 100%, that was us. Myself, Brian, and Lydia worked on that together. I did all the code for the boss level that you're seeing right now, and Brian and Lydia did more on power-ups and the other levels. We worked very hard on that because you can see we had to program everything in the game. The power-ups, the jumping, the movement, the boss shooting at specific times. It took me forever to get the boss's shooting working because originally he was shooting a never-ending stream of bullets at the player. It was difficult to get him to shoot one at a time, so we had a lot of...
To beat the level.
Yes, definitely. The game was very much impossible at first, so it was...
And even with the game itself, there are still some things of the game that weren't completed, such as some of the sound effects for the bowling ball. they're like the cat's actually getting hit. They don't have a sound effect for that. They don't go meow when they get injured, or they don't meow when they get a power up. The bowling ball is actually hitting the shield, which is a trash can lid, as you can see. Obviously, they're alley cats. So those don't have sound effects either. As you can see, the boss has been defeated. The milk has appeared. Grab the holy milk, and then onto the credits.
Yes.
So anyway, some of the things that we were not able to add, such as the sound effects, we weren't able to add some other things that we were hoping to add as well, which included, we wanted to add other levels, but of course we needed the presentation to be, especially in class, shorter period of time. We weren't able to add, we wanted a pretend game crash, cutscenes as well. We were hopefully hoping to have cutscenes, but we were running out of time, so we brought it down to the bare basics that we needed for the game to be completed. And honestly, it was probably one of our better games, and we had a lot of fun making it. You don't know how many cat puns we made in class and out of class. So anything else you want to add?
I think that was excellent, yes. Well, maybe we should talk about the teamwork that we worked together.
Yeah, the teamwork, we didn't work on the project outside of class as much as we did inside of class, but Brian, he had some friends on Skype, and they beta tested, basically, was it like around the world, because he had some people in like different countries like Canada and whatnot, so it was globally tested. So that was pretty cool.
This game has been played in many different countries.
Many different countries.
Yes.
So, Brian did a lot of the debugging. Honestly, it wouldn't be near as playable as it is now if he hadn't done a lot of the debugging and checking up the code. And the music, I had a hard time getting the code for the music to work, so he was basically our saving grace with this project in terms of the code. And that aside, I think that's everything that we have to talk about.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions about the game in particular? The cutscene is basically a snippet of a scene that's played between gameplay. Usually it's before the actual game or in between gameplay, so you go from level to level. And there's a short non-playable scene. It's like a short movie that kind of explains the transition between there and now. So the cutscene would be, how did the cats, what's their story? Why did they actually want to raid this knockoff brand market for milk? What's the reason behind it? They just look like army cats raiding a market. So basically that was going to explain sort of the backstory behind that and why they were doing what they were doing. Yes?
Do you plan to continue developing this and add the cutscenes and the additional sound effects and so forth, or is it too much?
We had considered, I think we considered adding a little bit extra afterwards.
We did consider upgrading the game, but I think it's beautiful as it is. The plot in many older retro video games is very non-existent. And in our game, it doesn't really need to exist for an enjoyable playing experience, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think the game is good as it
It makes
is.
perfect sense. I mean, cats raiding a market for milk.
I
That
don't
makes
know why we
perfect
need an
sense.
explanation, frankly.
But if people really wanted some of like the really cool in-depth backstories to make their own fan fictions or story about it, then sure. But yeah, the cutscenes, I had actually gotten through a couple panels of the cutscene that were going to be added, but that was about a day before. And so that was about around crunch time, so I wasn't able to actually implement it. But like with the graphics, we went with a retro style, so the cutscenes, if you were to actually see them, they would have the similar retro pixelated cutscene style. Anything else?
Besides your deep statement about the robot threat to
Yes.
human labor,
Yes.
Very deep.
Very deep.
are there some more puns you could point on? Because I
Oh
remember
my word.
after the fact,
We had a lot of...
so fast and they're covered.
Brian, can we please go over to like the I think it's the game aisle. No, go to the food section. I think a lot of people are gonna love the food section.
One place where we came up with a lot of puns was potential names for the game. We threw around Mission Impossible. What was a lot of
Yeah,
different
so
stuff.
we have like twice Krispies, twice the rice, double the price,
Captain Brunch.
triple the price. Yeah, we have hot Kool-Aid. If anyone has seen Julian Smith's viral video, hot Kool-Aid, that's definitely where that one came from. We have Captain Brunch because no one has time for lunch or breakfast. We have I Cannot Believe This Is Butter. Different side. We have Dr. Polk. Beef Assistant. Instead of a glove, it's a sock because it's a knockoff brand. Let's see, what else do we have? Kit Kats, and it's spelled with, Kit Kats because they're cats. What else? Oh, Red Pig, because pigs can fly. So instead of Red Bull, it's Red Pig. So that was kind of another thing. And we have another one over, I think it's the game section over here. So in the game section, to any of the gamers out there, so we have Z-Box, that's the green one at the very bottom. So basically we had an original, not an original, but a picture from the internet of JS Bach, and I added it on there, but it just didn't seem like it fit. So what I did was I Frankendolled the picture so it looked more pixelated, and that's why it has the outline in the background, the outline. So it looks a lot more like it fits the retro game style. And we have different references in there for all sorts of different video games to all the gamers that really like that sort of thing without messing with the actual companies about using the actual name of their game, as is seen in a lot of other video games when they reference other companies and whatnot. So those are the many myriads of references. There were more, but we couldn't possibly fit them in there. Any other questions? Yes. This one? Oh, no. This one, no, I didn't embellish it. I have cat earphones, but I didn't bring them up stage because I thought it'd be a little bit too silly. But, no, it's too silly. I could possibly.
You should have worn them.
I should have. They light up. But no. Thank you. It's a nice touch. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, especially in speaking of the program. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's very, very, very easy to play. It just uses like 4 buttons. So it's simple to play, and the coding in itself is it really helps represent the department because the coding style, like when we used the Game Maker Studio, it was this is coming from me because I'm not a science major. I'm actually a music major. So you're coming from somebody who doesn't have as much coding experience as like a lot of the people in the computer department, but coming from my experience just using Game Maker Studio and working with Python before that, and that was the experience that I had in fundamentals in computing, and then moving on to this one, the coding was actually very easy to understand. Dr. Thornton was very helpful in explaining the hows and whys and helping debugging and just how the code flows and why things react in the game using steps, whether it's just the creation code. All those sorts of things were really, really interesting because, I work with instruments, but coming from the computer standpoint, I think a lot of people need to know at least a little bit of coding because it helps teach them the logic of how things go from start to finish and helps them think really cognitively.
One big thing I focused on was, since this was a group project with several people working on it together, I tried to make my code very, very readable.
Yes.
I had lots of comments. I would go
Lots
for
of comments.
a simpler, longer method rather than something that was shorter but more complex, because I wanted to make sure that everybody would be able to understand it at their first glance. So it was very important to me, was making the code simple.
Yeah, and also the comments as well was extremely, extremely helpful in being able to understand what the other person was doing, what they were getting at. If there was a problem with the code, they would add a comment saying, here's this problem right here, this is what I was trying to get at. So there was a lot of being able to work together, even though we weren't able to work outside of class. We would shoot each other emails. So there was a lot of working together, and everyone was very helpful in listening to other people's ideas and just keeping the atmosphere very upbeat, thanks to Joy. She takes after her name.
I do, it's true.
Yes.
I haven't, actually. I'll have to check that out. We should go to a movie later to celebrate.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes. Exactly.
That sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes.
Yay.
Okay.
All right. I'm Shannon Bolton, and this is Nikki Pruitt, and we're doing a study of artificial life, and we named it Eye of the Tiger.
So basically, the idea behind our presentation is we want to observe how a feature evolves over time of a certain creature. We decided to look at the vision sector of a tiger or creature to see how it would change, like what would be the optimal cone length or sector length for the for survival. We used the tiger as our creature because we needed something that was a carnivore that would eat other predators, and it was easier to see and visualize as eating other tigers. We had to choose certain attributes like hunting, eating, wandering, reproducing, growing, starving, and energy in order to see how these all like affect their survival and how they would act in our simulation. And we used NetLogo to demonstrate this. NetLogo is a programmed simulation tool. That way you can see how you can set up, it's very easy to use. We can set up little creatures and let them go about their merry way, and they will behave as you code them.
So we had a vision. We decided that they were going to have a vision, each tiger, and we decided that we wanted them to have even playing fields, so that we wanted them to have all the same area in their vision. But we wanted to allow them to be a little different and kind of evolve over time to decide what was the best vision distance for them to survive in this environment. So we let them have varying distances of their cones. So some of them you'll see later will have very wide cones, and the other ones will have very long, narrow cones. And they make up their vision sector.
For our behaviors of our tigers, we start off initially in the wandering state. This is their default state. They're wandering around the playing field looking for food. Once they find a prey, how they find a prey is the prey will enter their cone of vision or their vision sector, and they will pursue that faster than normal. Their speed increases, and they actively try to chase it. Once they catch it, they eat it and obtain a fixed amount of energy. And this energy is then used for reproduction. Once they reach a certain amount of energy, they will spawn a child. And for hunting, when you're in the hunting state, you have the prey in your vision cone. You will move at a faster pace, like I said, and you will try to keep that the prey in your cone until you catch it and eat it. However, the prey can escape your cone, and if for some reason like it gets out of your cone of vision, you have one turn or one tick to get it to where it's back in your cone of vision. And how it does this, the tiger will look where it expects the prey to be, and if it's in that area, it remains in the hunting state. If the prey is not where it expects to be, it will revert to wandering after that tick.
So reproduction, we decided we wanted to figure out what was the best way to reproduce, and we kind of wanted them to throw in some variables. So when a tiger becomes at its max energy level, it will spawn another child. And the child will have its own vision cone, and it's based on the parent, and we use a Gaussian distribution with the mean at 0, and we have a mutation rate slider that we would have been able to show, but technical difficulties. So we had a mutation rate, and so we just did one standard deviation away, but it could technically do a little more than that if we wanted to play around with. And the child was based on that, so they could either look very similar to the adult or look slightly varying.
Okay, and we ran into a problem. If we didn't keep the population constant, the tigers would go extinct pretty much. They would eat each other, and then the last tiger standing would eventually starve to death. So in order to do this, keep the population constant, we had a function that would count the number of tigers, and if it got below a certain number, it would automatically reproduce a new tiger based on the oldest living one. So it would have the vision cone and the attributes of the oldest tiger that was in existence at that time. We didn't really have a problem with overpopulation. We noticed that even though we could have put something in if it got over a certain amount, they would sustain like the same about 30 tigers, which was our population. So that didn't really seem to be a problem.
And in our picture, we have the tiger, the black one. They turn black once they have a baby, and then the smaller one, the child, is the orange one that it just reproduced. So, can you click play on the left video, please? Thank you. So, this is a video of our simulated evolution from start. And eventually, we wanted to know what length cone would work best for hunting in this environment. And over time, if you look in the right picture, they decided that they liked really long cones. It was much easier to find other tigers to eat and to go and catch them, and they would be able to follow them better.
After we discovered that long cones worked best for hunting in an environment where you only had to worry about finding food, we wanted to see what would happen if we threw in other environmental features. We decided on adding obstacles like rocks that the tigers would have to go around, and if for some reason a tiger caught onto another tiger and they were trying to hunt it, if a rock was between the predator tiger and the prey tiger, the predator would lose sight of the tiger, the prey, and just go about its merry way and enter the wandering state again. And we found that this actually really does affect how the line of sight evolves over time.
May you click the video on the left, please? So when we had obstacles, we wanted to know which distance would work better. And unlike when they didn't have obstacles, they wanted long cones. In this situation, they wanted shorter cones. And we still have a few with kind of long cones, but that's just because of the mutation when they have a child. But most of them ended up with very short cones, and they could see the obstacles better and turn around faster and find another tiger much faster to gain energy. Any questions? We thought about getting to that point, but you have to, once you start, you got to realize all the things that go into making a tiger. They have to eat, they have to grow, they can starve, they can have to reproduce, and you would have to go back through that with each different animal, per se, and if you keep doing that, well, how do you make them different? And so then you have to go into more, and within the time limit, we weren't able to do that, but it's very easy to go, you could be able to do it, just you'd have to have time to do it.
Your screen looked like it was just wrapping around. It went from one top of bottom screen and ended up back at the top. Is that how that works?
Yes, it does. So it would just, they kind of go in a continuous loop. We didn't have a border on it. We just wanted them to keep going around so they could keep chasing them, because it's not very fair to run into a wall and then have to turn around and then
Well, one thing I was thinking about was every tiger was running at a fixed rate, correct?
Yes.
But I presume that was something that you can control as well?
Yes, and they actually run faster when they're hunting.
Oh, they do?
Yes,
Yes.
Yes, so when they start hunting, they do, but the one that is being hunted doesn't realize it, so it doesn't move faster. But yes, you can change it as much as you want speed-wise.
If you had an area where you had an area of the group where there were obstacles, and an area where there wasn't, I wonder if within a single population, you have an area where there would be longer cones over here and shorter cones over here, where there was an area where there was lots of obstacles.
That probably would happen when they
If you had,
reproduce.
Sort of territorial or something like that.
That could be possible, yeah.
You would have to add in the borders, but I'm sure that would.
Yeah, as long as you had sections for that defined. We just kind of put the obstacles randomly in there, but you can actually pick where you want them, so you could confine them to a specific location. And that would be a really neat experiment to run.
When you did your attributes for your tigers, when you said hunting, did you specify what they would hunt?
actually ran into this problem in the very beginning. What we had to do in order to prevent this from happening was when a tiger spawned the child, it would be in the location behind it, so you can't see behind you. So the tiger wouldn't eat the child. We reversed its heading, so it would be heading in the opposite direction, and it would move forward one space. That way it would never eat the children. So
Immediately, at least. Immediately, at
yes.
least. It might have happened.
Eventually, but.
Thank you.
So given the simulation, what do you think would have been the result had you given the tigers also a survival instinct, for instance, the ability to recognize they were being hunted?
We actually wanted to do that. We wanted to add like a hearing factor. That way they could hear if another tiger was getting close to them. But we didn't have time, but we think it would eventually longer cones possibly.
I
or,
think
like,
longer cones would ended up still happening, because the vision actually wouldn't have been affected, but the hearing would be.
Yes.
So in that case, I guess they would run faster away. It would be much harder for you to catch a prey in that instance, and depending on, you would have to code up how much faster they were going. So we would always know, like, this one was going 5 times faster than the one catching it. So that would be something you'd have to go into also. How fast were you making them in that situation? Right.
Yes.
There's always, like, once you start, we didn't realize how many attributes you
Yes.
could build on top of it. There were many options we were going to have that we went through to try to decide, and we're like, how much do they actually bring value to what we're doing and what we're testing? So you can add as many as you want, but you kind of want something that will add value to your study. So
Maybe you could add as many attributes as you want. Can you link attributes? Like, say, vision and hearing, or vision and speed. So, you
Yes.
get a longer cone, the children be slower.
yes,
Or you get
yes,
a faster
yes,
cone, you get faster.
most
Yes.
definitely.
It's just a matter of programming it.
Yeah.
Sounds like a cool program.
It really
Yes.
is, and it's very, very friendly. So people that aren't very familiar with coding, it's very easy to learn. Very much like written language, almost like writing English sentences. So
We just started using this semester, so we've managed to pick it up with doing our other courses and learn how to use it fairly well. So.
just common like programming knowledge, just syntax kind of
Yes.
things, and nothing, nothing very hard. Something you could learn in like your first Python class or something. So it was very easy to do. You just had to decide. That was the hardest part, is deciding this is what we wanted to test. Because we could have coded all day and added as much as we wanted, but
Yeah.
how much value would it bring?
We also had to know a lot of, like, taking math into consideration, especially when we were doing the vision, cone length, and the hunting, how you would see if the prey was between the obstacle or if the prey was on this side, like, your side of the obstacle. So that was quite an interesting problem.
Morning, I'm Dr. Nancy Stewart, and this is Chastity Taylor. We have two students this morning who are presenting their same projects, each one on a different social agency. And as part of this project, which was part of their human behavior in the social environment class, they were to assess an organization related to organizational behaviors. These studies are both qualitative studies as opposed to the quantitative study that we saw yesterday. And with that, I'd like to introduce Chastity.
Hello, my name's Chastity Taylor. As Dr. Stewart was saying, this project goes through and looks at the organizational structure of a mental health facility that serves this area and several others around it. We had to look at factors, or I looked at factors from the organizations from the past to the present, and then I critically analyzed the structure of it. And then I went in and looked at how social work, the profession itself, was active within the organization, and the extent to which they practice anti-oppressive social work practice. For those who don't know, anti-oppressive social work practice is an attempt in social work within the profession to acknowledge oppression within societies, economies, cultures, and groups, and to remove or negate the influence of that oppression. The aim is to empower the client relationships in the context of the existing oppression in society and practice. Mental health itself is important because people who have mental health problems generally feel like they have lost control of their lives. And when a mental health facility is run correctly, it can give the people that power back over their lives. But when it's not run correctly, it can take what power they feel they do have away from them. For this project, I went into the facility and interviewed 2 different professions because I wanted to get 2 different professional views on the structure of the organization. I interviewed a social worker and a nurse, and then I went in and observed. I looked around, I listened, I heard, and then I went on their website to get the history and the research, and I read my textbooks to kind of get familiar with what a structure should look like and definitions and stuff like that. The history for this organization is very long and very complex, and I have 10 minutes. So we're just going to say that they've been through 4 names, and they've changed their focus of practice multiple times. In 1991, it is interesting to note that they became privatized, and when they did, their focus shifted from initially inpatient services to expanding outpatient services. They don't really receive a whole lot in the way of funding. And they could use more parenting education. They could use more parenting education, available mental health services in the area, and support groups located within the organization itself. The organizational structure is very complicated as well, but it is also very well defined. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say on that. I looked at the relationship that the organization had with the employees, and overall, they have a really good relationship with their employees to a certain extent. They handle grievances through the chain of command, and they try to include their employees in decision-making as much as possible. Their relationship with the community isn't bad, but there's a negative connotation along with mental health in general. So the surrounding neighborhood that they're in doesn't want the mental health facility there, but nobody wants a mental health facility in their neighborhood. So they try to do outreach and kind of, I'm trying to think of the word, like damage control, kind of. We looked at the relationship with their participants, and they do the best they can to make sure that participants have an equal say in their treatment, because it's their treatment. They're the most important factor. Without them, you don't exist. Power. Depends on who you ask. Depends on which profession that you talk to who has the most power in the organization. Everybody could agree that ultimately, as far as professionals go, doctors have the most power. But, and I'm going to quote the social worker on this, she said, power is an illusion because the participant has to agree to treatment, and without their consent, there is no power with anyone. But they're in a locked facility, so the workers have the keys. As far as ideology goes, they're very participant-focused. They believe everyone needs help, everyone's entitled to help, everyone deserves help. The social worker herself uses a trans-theoretical approach, which if you don't know what that means, it means that she uses a multitude of social work theories to guide her practice. And she uses evidence-based practice as well. She bases what she does on the specific individual. It went black. That wasn't supposed to happen. Okay. Sorry. Social work within the organization itself is sort of everywhere. They're in committees, inpatient, outpatient services. They work as therapists, advocates. They're usually the ones who lead any kind of change. Nurses do a lot of that too, but the social worker is usually the one putting committees together and making plans of action that are focused on changes within the organization. The conclusion, on the discussion and the analysis overall, the organization is a privately owned for-profit institution. The structure is predominantly bureaucratic, even though they have some traits with other structural styles. The biggest boundary issue that they have is when you have an employee that works on the same unit with people their age, because they kind of blur the line between caregiver or health professional and co-ed. The biggest struggle within the organization itself is their reluctance to change their policies and the way they do things. They're very set in their ways. The facility mostly follows their policies, and they do their best to empower their patients, but it's a lockdown facility, so in and of itself, that's disempowering. They could be an anti-oppressive organization, but they're not there yet. Any questions? No?
And I would like to introduce Kristen Ferguson, who is another student within the same class, and this is a similar project done on a national nonprofit organization that is serving our region, and she would like to share her findings and research with you now.
Hello, everyone. Like Dr. Stewart said, my name is Kristen Ferguson, and I'm a senior within the social work department. As one of the courses we are required to take, it is called Human Behavior Social Environment 2. And during that course, we really look at individuals within the community and organizational context. So one of the projects we are required to complete is an organizational analysis, and I chose it is a national nonprofit association, but they do have local agencies. So I did it within a local agency of this service organization. The clientele that they serve are children and adults with physical and developmental disabilities. For the remainder of the presentation, I do want to note that the name will not be mentioned of the organization, as well as any identifying information, just to keep their name confidential. Organizational analysis is important in order to implement positive change in areas that need improvement, as well as to recognize practices that already are done effectively. Social workers can promote well-being in an organization by empowerment, advocacy, and using a tempered radical approach. And what that means is basically looking at the organization and seeing if what they are doing is effective, and if it's not, how they can change those things. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had this up here. Okay. Ooh. Wrong way. Okay, so that was everything I just said. So you have a visual. Okay. Literature review. An organization is an organized group of people that are working together for a common goal or purpose. Different organizations have different theories, policies, perspectives, management styles. All of those different things make up an organization, and it determines how it functions as a whole. It also affects not only the people that work within the organization, but the clientele they serve in a drastic way. The method of use, I interviewed a licensed social worker within the organization. I also interviewed a mother whose child was receiving services from that organization. I was also able to tour the facility and interact with a lot of the participants and kind of use my five senses to see how the environment felt, if it was a warm and welcoming place or if it was cold and not welcoming. So a little bit about the history, and I love the history of this organization. In the mid-1900s, those with disabilities, they did not have many options. The only option really was institutionalization, which during that time, being put in an institution, a lot were overcrowded, there was poor living conditions, and it really was just not a homey place. It's not something that people would wanted to put their loved ones in. So there were two families in the New York area, and they had children with disabilities. They wanted to provide outpatient resources for their children, and so they reached out to their local community through a newspaper article saying, does anyone want to join in on these efforts? And they actually received a great deal of feedback, and that was how the national organization was founded, and that was in 1949. The Alabama agency that I went to, it was founded 9 years later in 1958. As mentioned previously, this is a nonprofit, so they receive most of their funding from state and federal money, as well as, for instance, grants from the Department of Mental Health as well as the Department of Education. They also receive money from fundraisers and just voluntary donations. Their most accessible resource is definitely the community support and the participation within the community. They have tons of volunteers, and that's something that they really appreciate and value. Their most scarce resource, however, is just unpredictable funding cuts. They never know from year to year how much money they're going to have to work with. So that's always a struggle within their organization. Here you can see the organizational structure. At the very top, there is a volunteer board of directors, and that board makes all the decisions for the organization in regards to policies, as well as basically everything else. Below that is the executive director, and their job is to oversee the actual center and location. Below the executive director are the different program departments, and then staff members follow below. Through the structure, we see a universalistic style management done within the organization, and the staff members do have a say in what goes on at the organization, but their voices are voiced through the executive director. The executive director works as a liaison, kind of giving the board their personal feedback, but yet the board overall has the ultimate say. With employees, if there's ever a conflict or any issue, they have weekly staff meetings, and those are used as just basically a debrief of everything that happened the previous week, as well as getting ready for what's going to happen the week after. And if issues are not resolved, that's when they go to their direct supervisor. Okay, training hours are also required of the employees. They have mandatory training hours, for instance, on ethics or reporting, as well as if they are licensed, then they must complete their licensure hours as well in order to abide by policy. So the participants of the organization, there are over 450 children and adults that are served. They are seen as experts of their own life because the clients are the ones that have to live every single day. They know their struggles, they know the things that they really need to work on, and so because of that, they do have a say in the services they receive, and then they also have a say in the goals that they set. All of the participants are voluntary. The only way they would not be voluntary is if it was mandated by a court order. And then documentation is also given to all of the participants of the services that they receive, so they can kind of keep a track on everything that they have received from the organization. Okay, so power, I just touched over this, but they do have no legal authority unless mandated by courts. They do show within this organization an anti-oppressive power with approach. And anti-oppressive practice is a practice that focuses on power imbalances and oppression within the macro system. So if there are those issues, the goal of anti-oppressive practice is to really find those problems and then make a positive and effective change. So through that, you can see the power with approach. It is definitely a partnership between the staff members and the clients. That can be seen by the fact that clients are seen as experts of their own lives. Participants choose goals, and again, they empower their clients to take action within their own lives as well as within the community. Here are the mission statements and the goal. I will just read this verbatim, but the mission statement: to positively affect the quality of life for those with developmental disability, to educate the public about developmental disability, and to support the families of those individuals. The goal: to be a part of the total community services delivery system with particular concern to provide for the needs and promoting the general welfare of individuals. And again, the mission statement and goal does have information omitted just for confidentiality purposes. As far as the theories and perspectives used, they use a variety of them. One perspective that I definitely saw was a strengths perspective. They look at all of their clients and they see their strengths and their abilities, not the things that they can't do. They also use the systems theory. When they look at the client, they look at all the different systems that make up that individual. So they may look at the environment, they may look at the school system, family support, friends, all of those areas, because that all affects the individual. Lastly, they use the empowerment theory. They empower clients to make a change within their own lives as well as to reach out to the community. Advocacy is a big part of this organization, and they actually encourage their clients to take part in advocacy. If there's ever a bill or something within legislation that could affect them, they encourage them to tell their personal story. The relationship within the community is really great. They service 5 different counties, and they're positively seen. They have a great rapport with many different agencies, doctors' offices, school systems, all of those arenas. They have community support and involvement through donations, volunteers, and participation. One of the main struggles that I saw from doing this analysis is, one, the participants don't really have a say in what occurs in the organization, and the policies and the decisions made really do affect them. So it would be nice if maybe they could have a little feedback. And then the second thing is, because there are so many participants within this organization, service providers have less time with each participant, and that can cause the clients not to receive as much care as they probably should. For instance, because they have over 450 clients, if we have a speech pathologist, physical therapist, you name it, the client may only receive services once or twice a month. And they really may need more services than that, but currently that isn't an option. Empowerment of clients can be seen by the partnership among staff members and the clients. Participants are seen as experts of their own lives. They choose their services and their goals. Services can also be offered in the natural environment, especially with children. A lot of those services are brought directly to their home. This organization also takes part in empowerment education and advocacy. Values are actualized by offering services to all who qualify. They do not discriminate. If they meet the qualifications and they have a need, then they are going to help them. They treat all clients with respect, and they see diversity as a strength and not a weakness. Leadership is shown by social workers through advocacy, empowerment, and community awareness. And one of the biggest things that I think I learned from this project was that every organization is going to have their strengths and their weaknesses, but what's really great about organizational analysis is you can kind of pinpoint those things, and you can work towards the areas that do have weaknesses, and then you can also build towards the areas that are effective and are your strengths. There are my references. So, any questions? Oh. Usually, this is not in all situations. If it was a child, then they would go towards either the parent or the person that has guardianship, definitely to work with and make that decision. If it is an adult and they are unable to make those decisions, then that would also go to whoever is the guardian or the signer of that person as well.
And I think that same question could be asked of the mental health facility as well. Is there an advocate assigned to every patient? Everyone who goes to this facility? Well, at the mental health facility, the social workers are the therapists, and they act as their advocates. So, because of the way it works, then yes, they all have a patient advocate.
Any more questions? Thank y'all for listening.
Student in the biology department. What I'm going to talk to you about today is just a little bit about my graduate project. We're still going through a lot of the data, so this is just going to be a little bit of background. So this is a multivariate analysis, and this is also a land type association study, and I'll give a little bit of background as to what those two things are. Maybe. There it is. Okay. So a multivariate analysis in its simplest form is a way to look at multiple variables simultaneously, and the necessity for these studies arise when you're trying to measure more than one characteristic in many different individuals, and the relationships among the characteristics make it necessary for these to be studied at the same time. So for instance, if you are looking at plant communities and you want to look at why these plants are growing in this area together, you couldn't just look at what's in the soil, because there's more to plant growth than that. You're going to need to look at how much moisture is in the soil, what direction the slope faces, so that you know how much sunlight that area gets during the day. So there's many different variables that come in when you're looking at plant communities. And then the purpose of the multivariate analyses is to treat multivariate data as a whole, and to summarize the data, and also to reveal its structure. So a land type association study, these types of studies classify systems, and they express the relationships between vegetation and physiography, also between the vegetation and the soil, and between the physiography and the soil. These factors are going to strongly determine your composition of your communities, your size, and also your productivity. And once these relationships are visible, it's possible to delineate land units within a region based on species associations that can be related to soil and landform variables. So ecological land units are then either going to be land type associations or just land types, and these guidelines are all done by the USDA Forest Service. LTAs are delineated on the basis of hydrology, geology, topography, and LTs, or land types, they just look at the vegetation, the soils, and the landform. And this is an example of a study that was done in the northern Green Mountain National Forest, where they were looking at different types of bird species. It was conducted over 9 years, looking at 83 different species. And this was how it laid out at the end. They had 6 different LTAs. and all the little black dots are just different little clusters where species were grouping together. So that would be what it would look like in a visual form. So why are these studies important? These studies are going to assist land managers in selecting the most appropriate methods suited for a particular ecosystem. Without studies such as this, suitable management would be difficult at best for a particular area. A lot of people are surprised in the fact that Alabama has a very diverse assortment of plant life. We are at the range limits of many Appalachian and coastal plain plants that kind of come together, and you'll see unique and different plant assemblages. And also ecosystem management and restoration requires baseline data on forested communities and their relationship to soil and landform variables. So that's just some background. And the objectives of this project were to utilize a multivariate analysis in order to gain an understanding of the plant communities on both Duggar and Hurricane Mountain through looking at the vegetation, the soil, and the landform variables. And to also establish baseline data for Hurricane Mountain. Up to this point, there had been no data for Hurricane. And also to look and try to find unique forested ecosystems at the landscape scale. I apologize. I use an Apple, and when I convert to PowerPoint, it finds it amusing to change things, so it shouldn't be all over top of each other. The first area I worked on was Duggar Mountain. Duggar Mountain sits at about 650 meters, or about 2,100 feet. It's the second highest peak in Alabama, the first being Cheehaw. It's located within the Shoal Creek Ranger District of Talladega National Forest. And the physiographic region is the Southern Ridge and Valley. And the topography for this mountain changes between mesic low slopes, which would be moist low slopes, to xeric side slopes, which would be your drier slopes. And the predominant terrain is steep, with slopes of 20 to 70%. And as you can see, Duggar kind of straddles between Cleburne and Calhoun County in the northern part. Hurricane Mountain was the second area where I worked. Hurricane Mountain sits at about 543 meters, or just over 1,700 feet. It's the 28th highest mountain in the state. Hurricane Mountain is located at approximately 8 kilometers due west of Duggar, and it's on the other side of Alabama Highway 9. Hurricane Mountain, even though it is owned by the National Forest, it's surrounded completely by private land. There's no trails, there's no roads, so for me to go up, I had to get permission from one of the landowners, who coincidentally was one of Dr. Carter's former graduate students, so it worked out very well. So for field sampling, I did most of this in the summers of 2014 and 2015. Collected all the vegetation, soil samples, and landform data. It was 38 plots, 18 from Duggar and 20 on Hurricane. There was data previously collected by Dr. Carter that's also incorporated in this project, which brought the total plots on Duggar up to 48 and 68 total plots for the whole study. And all these sites were in mid to late succession. Sample plots were always placed in stands that showed growth of 20 years or older, and that were free of disturbances such as clear cutting. But if they had showed signs of fire, they were still left in. The plots were set up in 10 by 30 meters. This follows the Carolina Vegetational Survey standards. It's changed slightly. The main guidelines, 20 meters to 50 meters. It's altered in this area due to the changing topography. And then the trees, saplings, and seedlings, and herbaceous cover were all collected and documented. I included this picture. This is poison ivy, if you don't recognize it. And I included this because on Hurricane Mountain, there are areas where there's so much poison ivy and it's so tall and so thick, it looks like it's being cultivated. It's about this high, and it will, it goes as far as you can see. So it made working up there interesting. The soil samples. So this is what it looks like when we set up to run the soil samples. After the soil is collected, it's dried in a dryer, and then it's sifted, and then it's put, it's a hydrometer method of soil analysis or particle analysis. The soil is mixed with water and also a dispersing agent, which is sodium metaphosphate. We did that here, and then Auburn did the chemical analysis where they tested the different pH, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, potassium. And then we also did topographic relative moisture index. This is a method used that they've shown once this is calculated, it's easier to predict what species are going to grow where. It's a scaled index, so you add up all these and it gives you a number, and based off that number it's easier to tell the what should be growing in an area. We looked at relative density, relative basal area, relative frequency, and then importance values were calculated by stratum. Relative frequency and relative abundance were used in calculating importance values by stratum. For seedlings and herbs and subplots, woody species and separate strata were treated as separate species. This is where we are right now. So what's left is all the statistical analysis, which Dr. Carter is working on. So this is where we are at the moment. I'd like to thank JSU, Auburn, Friends of the Talladega National Forest, and the Forestry Service for making this project possible. And of course, Dr. Carter, Dr. TJ, and Dr. Klein, my other committee members. Questions? If anyone has any questions. Yes. There's a lot of it up there. It's more than I've ever seen in one area, which was interesting. I'm not allergic to it. My husband is very, very allergic to it, and he was kind of my assistant through all this. So he had a lot of poison ivy over the summer, but yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so first, just to get started, I want to walk y'all through the general life cycle of trematodes. A trematode is just a parasitic flatworm, and our species that we studied was called Proterometra, and this is actually a parasitic flatworm. So the snail is a critical step to parasite distribution. Snails host a variety of different types of parasites. So to begin the life cycle, trematodes begin in, say, like a land animal, like a bird. They get in the intestines of the bird where they sexually reproduce. From there, the bird defecates into open water and releases its eggs. From there, the eggs hatch in the open water and they attach to a snail host, and they penetrate the snail and they move into the gonadal tissue of the snail, and here they asexually reproduce. From there, the parasite sheds from the snail and it goes into a fish host. It either attaches or the fish eats the parasite, and then it just sits in there until a bird eats the fish, and then that's how the life cycle starts all over again. So down here is just a few pictures
of the phases of the parasite through its life cycle from egg to adult. This form right here that we've circled, this is called cercaria. This is the free-swimming form of the parasite, and this is what's going to shed from the snail and go into the fish. And this is the phase that we're looking at through our study. Here's just some close-up pictures of the snails that I took. This top picture is the anatomy of the snail. I've circled the gonadal tissue so you can see where the parasite actually gets inside the tissue. So this is the area that we will dissect and observe under the microscope. So just a basic definition of parasitism. It's the relationship between two things in which one, the parasite, benefits or lives off of the other. Here's just the top picture is of snail tissue when it's healthy. The bottom picture is after it's been infected with some type of trematode parasite. And you can see it looks considerably worse than the first picture, especially in this region right here. And it looks almost sort of mangled, and it, made us wonder, what effects are these parasites having on the snail when this is what its tissues look like after it's been infected. And, it's obviously not a good effect. We do know that it, in fact, castrates the snail because it infects the gonadal tissue. It castrates the snail, and it can no longer reproduce. But also, it's not advantageous for the parasite to kill its snail host because then it won't have a host to thrive from, and future parasites won't either. So our big question was, do these parasites, Proterometra, actually kill the snail species after it infects them? This is a picture of our parasite that we focused on, Proterometra, in its free-swimming cercaria form. It's about 5 millimeters in length. That doesn't sound very large, but when you compare it to its snail host, Alemia modesta, which is about 15 millimeters in length, that's about a third of the size of the snail. So, these huge organisms are living inside the snail and thriving off their tissues. So how is it surviving? So first, our first objective was to determine if live snails collected from a stream shed parasites in captivity. So first we had to go and get our snail sample. So we decided to go to Choccolocca Creek. It's about 10 minutes from here, and a previous study showed that there was the presence of Proterometra in this Choccolocca Creek, and it infected our snail host, Alemia modesta. So we went back last October, and we collected several hundred of them, and we just brought them back to the lab in stream water. Here's just a few pictures, and this star right here is Choccolocca Creek, just so you can see where it is with respect to Alabama, and this blue area right here is the entire Coosa River, so that just, the creek dumps into that. So next we had to figure out if the parasites would shed from the snail when we isolated them, and we found that they did. This picture right here is a snail that shed 2 parasites, and I have a video right here. Just so you can see the parasite swimming after it's shed. You can see how large it is compared to the snail, and the way that it swims is like an up and down kind of motion, and it resembles a fishing lure, and this is actually how it entices fish to eat them. So our next objective was, after shedding parasites, determine if the snails are still alive. So we had to isolate all the snails into these little plastic kind of tackle box containers. We numbered them all so we could identify the snails, and we referred to where we isolated them as microcosms. That just means little house. We put about 10 milliliters of water in each microcosm each day, And we changed the water at least once a day just to ensure that the snails were getting enough oxygen in the water. So we just checked each microcosm each day to see if there were any parasites that shed. Once they shed, we marked them with a little bit of paint just to make it easier for us to, look at the snail each day. And we just kept this process going until we no longer saw any more parasites emerging. We waited about a week after the snails stopped shedding to dissect them and observe their tissues, just to make sure that they weren't still infected and weren't going to shed more parasites. This picture is what healthy snail tissue looks like under a microscope. It's kind of like blue and green and kind of grainy looking. And then this is infected tissue with our parasite Proterometra. This entire little white bulb thing right here, that's just the head of the parasite. So these things are so large that you can't even see the tail and everything on the microscope. So our results, out of about 250 snails that we collected, only 3 shed our Proterometra parasite, which is crazy that out of all those hundreds of snails, only 3 were infected with Proterometra. They shed for about 32 days, averaging about 1 parasite a day that they shed. They lived for about 6 to 13 days, roughly, after they stopped shedding. So that was enough time for us to verify that they were no longer infected. And the crazy thing that we found was that the snails that were infected with Proterometra actually outlived all the other snails that weren't infected with it. All the other ones died weeks before they did. So that made us wonder what caused all these other snails to die. Could it have been that they were infected with some other type of parasite, or maybe it was just our lab techniques? When we dissected all the other snails that died, we found that pretty much the majority of them were infected with some type of parasite or another. We didn't know, we didn't identify those parasites, but we knew it was some type of trematode. So maybe those parasites actually kill the snail. Maybe that's the effect that they have. Or could it have been that our parasite, Proterometra, actually uses a strategy to keep the snail alive until it's done, until it doesn't need it anymore? This picture right here is of one of the other snails that we dissected that had this parasite in it. As you can see, the tissue's like completely just taken over by whatever this parasite is. And when you compare that to the Proterometra infected tissue, this tissue kind of right here doesn't look infected other than just the head of the parasite in there. So, maybe the reason that all the snails died was just lab techniques. Maybe they just don't live well when you take them out of their environment. Taking an organism out of their natural, where they live is, going to be stressful on them, even for a snail. So it could have been that. Maybe they weren't getting enough oxygen supply through the water. They're normally completely submerged in, a stream, so they're constantly getting oxygen as opposed to being put in these little containers. It could have been due to chemical residue from the plastic, from the little tackle boxes we used. We really don't know until we do a study on that. We won't know the answer, and who knows if we would ever figure it out. Originally, when we started this study, we had 2 other objectives. We wanted to take the snails that shed the Proterometra. We wanted to put them back in Choccolocca Creek, leave them out there for a few weeks, and then go back and try to find them and recollect them, bring them back to the lab, and see if they were either reinfected with the Proterometra species or if they were infected with some other type of parasite, and then just see if they could survive being infected a second time.
So what we hope to gain from this study was just expanding the relationship of the Alemia modesta versus, or with its parasite Proterometra, which really isn't a lot. When I started the study and I was looking up different resources and things like that, there was only one paper written about Proterometra. And, it was actually a study done in Choccolocco Creek as well. So we literally didn't have anything to go off of. We made up our own methods. Nobody else had, isolated them and tried to get this, to see if they lived through infections. So we could confirm, though, from our study that, the snails did survive in being infected from the Proterometra. That's pretty much the only thing we can, verify. But, we're happy with that we did get those results. We probably ended the study with more questions than we started with, but that's what makes a study great, because from here we can, continue our research and hopefully answer those questions one day. So that's it. Thank y'all, and do y'all have any questions? We don't know. That's really what made us kind of interested about the study, because, you could see from the video, this thing is huge compared to the snail. And, we thought for sure that it was going to kill them. But it really kind of seemed, we can't verify this, but it seemed as if the snails lived longer when they were infected with Proterometra. So it's just crazy.
What do you think the natural infection rate is in the wild-type snails? Do you think 3% or 10% of them are infected? Or?
With the Proterometra? We really don't know. We thought that just all these snails were going to just shed all these parasites, and then we only had 3. So we wonder if it's like a seasonal thing. If we repeat the study in like the summer, maybe there will be more. We really don't know. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I would be glad to introduce Dana Mann here. He's going to be talking about a project that we started on, and it has to do with a new way of looking at genetic data, which has, I'm sure, been a big headache for him, having to go in and do a lot of this stuff by hand and manually look at data in a way that there are no programs out there available to look at. So I've been really impressed with some of the results he's getting, and I'll just let Dana tell you about the project.
All right. Yes, my name is Dana Mann, and today I'll be looking at untargeted metabolomic insights from molecular identified bacteria. Yes, it was a very difficult proof of concept study, since there isn't anything like it. It's very sort of novel in the approach. Let's see. Oh, no. Wrong direction. On stage. Metabolomics. If you don't know, it is just the study of all the interactions of all the metabolites, lipids, proteins, carbohydrates, also vitamins, minerals that are in an individual or set or group in a certain tissue at a certain state usually. In my illustration, you can see it's at the very far end of the ohmic scale between an essential dogma of biology. We all know DNA goes RNA and the protein. Well, at the distal end, you have metabolomics. It's not the ultimate end. We don't know if there's anything past it between from genotype to phenotype, but we like to think that. Metabolomics is not the end and be all for it, but it is at least a step in the right direction as we find out what are our genes doing to become a trait. Now there's 2 methodologies Untargeted or targeted looks at the sort of a group of metabolites in a specific concentration in a specific tissue, like blood metabolites.